Hello and welcome to another episode of Currently Speaking. I'm Bill Current, president of the Current Consulting Group, and I am joined today by my very good friend, Greg Henderson. We'll get to Greg here in a minute, but let me just make my obligatory plugs for Current Consulting Group. So if you like today's episode, let us know that, subscribe, share it with others. If you're interested in listening to past episodes of Currently Speaking, you can go to our website at currentconsultinggroup.com. You'll find past episodes of the podcast. You'll find past webinar episodes and blog posts, and you're welcome to any of those. And if you have any suggestions or ideas for topics you'd like us to cover in Currently Speaking, just reach out to us at info@currentconsultinggroup.com. We love suggestions, and if we use one of your ideas, we will give you a big shout out during that episode. So let us know what you want to hear about, and we will definitely take it into consideration at info@currentconsultinggroup.com. So today I am joined by Greg Henderson of Federal Drug Testing Services. Greg is very well known in the drug testing industry. I'm sure if you're tuning in, it's probably because you saw that I was going to be speaking with Greg and you wanted to hear what he had to say. Greg is an expert certainly on the FAA regulations and HHS. That's his sort of claim to fame. But actually, Greg knows a lot about all the different areas of federal regulatory drug and alcohol testing. And he is also, let me hold this up, he is also the author of this new book called Trust But Verify. And even though Greg has written many books in his career, this is his first industry book. And it is chock full of great information. I love it. One of the things he points out at the beginning of the book is that, well, there is a focus throughout the book on the Federal Aviation Administration regulations and scenarios, et cetera. It's a lot of what's talked about in the book is applicable to Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Federal Railroad, you name it, because many of the issues spill over from one agency to the other when it comes to compliance, and the principles that he talks about in terms of compliance and education and leadership as well. So I highly recommend the book, Trust But Verify. And let's get into that a little bit, Greg. First, welcome to this episode of Currently Speaking. Thank you. I know how busy you are, so thank you for making the time to do this.
Thank you, Bill, for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Greg is actually, just for our audience's information, Greg is on the road today as we speak, and is not always on the road, but oftentimes when he and I speak by phone, he's somewhere in the country or the world. Yeah, so it's just sort of it is the result of his success. So it's actually a good thing. But let's talk first about, before we launch into the book, Greg, about the author section that you wrote about in the book, you talk about a little bit about your career in the federal government, in the military, et cetera, and why you decided to leave the federal government to provide your services sort of like from the outside. What prompted you to do that? What motivated you to want to do this?
Well, great question, Bill. And I get asked all the time, and that's probably what made me put it in the book. Like, why did I leave the FAA, or, why did I leave the government in itself? I think that at a certain point when you're in compliance and enforcement and you're, out and about visiting these locations. So with the FAA, our visits can turn from, pleasant to chaotic in, a drop of a hat, depending on the paperwork, right, and the findings and whatever. So I just started seeing more and more tears, more and more frustration, after we would leave. And I just kept saying to myself, what if they just had a little bit of training? What if they just had a little bit of understanding of actually, about these regulations and about this program? And being on the federal side, we're very limited to what we can say and what we can do, and no matter how much we want to help them. So I just started, kind of taking note of that as I was, going around, auditing. And I think the straw for me was when I was doing training one day, and those who were there know what I'm about to say. is I was training a new batch of inspectors on collection processes, and I was probably the only one trained as a collector, with the drug abatement side at that time. And I'm sure some may now have gotten training, but I was saying, like, how can we go out and actually inspect if we weren't actually trained? And during that training session, there was some inner conflicts going on, but they halted the training. And I just felt like, man, we really needed this. I really wanted to do it. And because my hands were tied with the feds, that probably was the Achilles of me wanting to leave and say, I would rather be on the compliance side of this instead of the enforcement side, that I could better help, the industry from the supporting side instead of the enforcement side. And
So that's when you started Federal Drug Testing Services?
yeah, well, actually, I left drug abatement all in itself and went to, ICE, and went to a different component altogether. So as I was, trying to figure this stuff out, I didn't want to have any conflict of interest. So I left drug and alcohol, the whole, part of drug and alcohol. Like, I had no more further role with drug and alcohol. And then I kind of started working on it.
So, and let me just elaborate just a little bit about the book for the audience. It's called Trust But Verify. And then it says FAA drug and alcohol compliance, what every DER manager and executive needs to know. So as I've scanned through the book and read some of the chapters, you really cover everything. I mean, and I love the guide to reading the book that you put in there. If you're a DER, start here. If you're new to the industry, start at the beginning and read all the way to the end. If you're a manager, start here. But tell us about the book. I mean, because I remember talking to you when you were still working on the book, and you said something to the effect of, I keep thinking of more things to put into the book. And so you finally had to just cut it off somewhere. So tell us, what was sort of the concept or the vision you had for this book when you started out?
Well, I didn't want to, have another industry book, with regulations and just about, policies and stuff. I wanted to actually focus on the human side of all of this. That was more driven from my consultant side, because now I got a chance to see the people. I got a chance to hear them and listen to them and their successes and their pains and their frustrations. And it didn't matter whether you were a DER collector, MRO, a SAP, or whatever, just on the other side of it. I wanted to approach it from that angle, like, what do we really deal with on a daily basis? Because I think that, in some of these roles as DERs, that is very misunderstood as how important, those roles are. They kind of get minimized to just an administrative role. And I wanted to actually go beyond that.
Okay. So where does Trust But Verify come in? I mean, that's the title of the book. I get it. But how does that factor in?
It's an industry word, like it's an industry word that you constantly hear, and it's not just in aviation or drug and alcohol. It's said, throughout society. And I just found myself from day one using it a lot, as from an inspector point of view. And it just always kept, resurfacing, trust but verify. Trust, you can trust something, but ultimately in compliance, you have to verify everything, because, you're not going to get a pass because you didn't verify it. It's like, yeah, I believe, what they said. I believe that this would happen. I believe that, this is going to be the outcome. But when it doesn't happen that way, it generally is because you didn't verify.
Yeah. So, use a lot of stories in the book, like personal accounts. I love that. That makes it real, right? I'm going to tell a little story about the two of us. So I recently published another book, my 11th book. Doesn't match the number that Greg has published in his career. because he's actually a novelist outside of the industry. But when I told Greg I had finished writing this book, What Every Employer Should Know About Marijuana, Greg said, I don't know if you remember this, Greg, but you said, how many pages is it? I found out later that Greg has a little pet peeve with people who write a 20-page pamphlet and call it a book. So my book is 191 pages, but I want to point out that Greg's is well over 350 pages. So, and the fact that you left out stuff that you kept thinking of. I mean, it just seems like you've had a career full of experiences that help you in the actual education and training that you do, and it's reflected in the book.
Oh, thank you. And Bill, and it's funny because I kept saying, I need to add this and I need to add this, right? And I need to take this out. So what I did recently is that I started a blog. I haven't launched it yet, but it's going to be a continuation of what didn't make it in the book.
Oh, great.
Like other topics, for instance, like one of the topics is going to be, what does it take to hire a DER? What do you look for in a DER? So that's going to be like one of the topics as well. Like, what do you actually look for in a DER? And I felt like that was important because you just can't hire anybody into this role, and also, do they necessarily have to have regulation experience, or are there some tangible traits that could cross over into being a DER because they wear so many hats, that goes beyond, regulation. So the blog will come out soon. I probably have written already probably about 4 or 5 blogs already.
Yeah.
I just haven't released it yet. But to answer your question, a lot didn't make it into the book, but I don't want to keep adding to the size of the book,
No, I get it. And I will say also to the audience, and I'm not saying that just because Greg's on the podcast today, but he is a very good writer. So he's very readable. It's easy to read his writing. It's not sophomoric or anything like that. It's just very smooth. And that reminds me, I want to bring up something. So
Okay.
we were talking about different parts of the book, and I'm going to go back to the beginning in a minute, but I brought this up with you just before we started the podcast. Because if you go through the table of contents of the book, you see there's a chapter on pre-employment, there's a chapter on reasonable suspicion, there's a chapter on post-accident, random, etc., and lots of other chapters. I just want to read for the audience what you wrote at the beginning of the chapter on post-accident testing, because I told Greg, this is perfect. I wish I had written this. So this is what Greg wrote at the beginning, the sort of the preamble to chapter 11, post-accident testing, which he calls the problem child. Quote, post-accident testing often becomes the problem child of a program because critical decisions must be made during moments filled with confusion, pressure, emotion, and operational chaos. And so I have to imagine that as you wrote that, you had a flood of scenarios that you actually have seen happen going through your mind.
Yeah. Well, I think because, when I say that, post-accident is the problem child is basically because I honestly just believe that there's unnecessary pressure that is put on a DER to be able to, acknowledge what a post-accident is. They're not mechanics. They're not the expert in the safety side of this. But when something happens, they have a shortened amount of time period that they have to conduct, test and determine should it be a federal test or not a federal test. But it's also broken down to, the complexity and the chaos that comes with that, depending on the nature of the post-accident, right? If they're fatal, is it this, how many, people are injured? And, then the FAA is, they're jumping on the DERs about doing the right test. Did you do it in the right time? But the DER is now held, in the chaos in the moment because they're not getting the answers that they need, from the people that are actually the experts in determining whether something is going to meet the definition of NTSB or not. And it just becomes a cycle of confusion for a DER in the chaos of that operation. And I wrote in there about, that a lot of the DERs and the drug programs are withheld, from being involved in the safety, processes of it. Like, I'm not sure why a lot of the companies don't include the DERs in their live exercises. When they have live exercises, why aren't the DERs involved in that, process? They bring out the medics, they bring out, everybody else that are involved with the post-accident, but they don't bring in the DERs and figure, okay, this is where you guys will come in to play. This is where we would contact you, right? Who is this chain of communication when that happens? Because most of the time the DER gets a call midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and they're expected to determine that test. So I think that's why I call it more of the problem child, is because, it's just, connected in the moment, and that moment can be very, very chaotic, as you can see on the news, when that occur.
So let me ask you two questions about why someone should read this book. First, if you're a DER, you could be a new DER, but even I'm thinking of a more experienced DER. What are they going to get out of reading the book, Greg? An experienced DER.
I think the DER who has been in this for a while, I would gear them towards my chapter of changing of the guard. Because it depends on when we say that's been in it for a while. Like, what do we determine to be in it for a while? I broke it down to post, pre-social media and post-social media. When DERs who have been in it for a while, they learned a lot through trial and error. They learned a lot through audits and inspections, or what they've learned from the inspectors, and they kind of been following these processes. The newer DERs that are coming in, they now have Chat GTP. They have, all of these different online accesses to information. And now they have people like you, and they have the conferences, they have my level 1 classes, they have all of this training, and they're learning things from the regulations. And, there's starting to be a clash between the older, DERs versus those that are coming in. And I think that the book is just more of a reminder to them as to, how important that their role is. And also, not on the negative side, but just the positive side too, is to say that, I hear you and I understand what you've been through and what you're going through. So this is for you too, that who have been in it for so long, as a reminder, of that, I hear you, and I hear the voices that they speak to me in, when I'm talking to the older ones and their concerns, because most of the time I would want them to get it. And, like, I've had, some veteran DERs who reached out to me, and they brought several copies of my novels, probably 10, 15 copies of my novel. And, they gave it to their leadership team. They want their leadership team to read it and talk about it from the executive side, because a lot of them are now transitioning into needing budgets for training. They need training to keep up with the times and what's new, because they now are realizing that, man, I knew this, but maybe I don't know it now the way I knew it, 10 years ago. So I would just encourage, the veteran DERs to kind of refresh, themselves about the importance of the role, and hopefully they can continue to have, a love for the, for the field.
Now, I want to turn the tables a little bit and add, because in the reader's guide, you also have a section if you are an executive or organizational leader. Now, I'm not going to say anything about past conversations you and I have had on this topic, but why should they read the book? What are they going to get out of it?
I believe that, that part actually came from a combination of conversations from DERs. As I'm auditing and I'm consulting and I'm looking at their operations, and most of them are, and not all of them. So if you guys are listening, and I'm not talking to you if this is not your operation, but a lot of them are void of understanding of the entirety, in which this program consumes a lot of, you know, uh, significance to a certificate.
Yeah.
And they should not look at the program like it's just an administrative role, because you cannot operate this certificate on a safety sensitive side without this drug and alcohol program.
Yeah.
So it's hopefully for them, those who are new to overseeing a drug and alcohol program, they probably should read it so they'll understand, like, what is this program in its entirety, other than just giving somebody a drug and alcohol test.
Yeah. Well, so you have a section before the book, before chapter 1, called The Road to Trust But Verify. So I just want to read the last paragraph from that and ask you to respond to it. This book is shaped by everything I have experienced. More importantly, it reflects my belief that many problems can be avoided when people are educated, supported, empowered, and open to honestly examining the systems they uphold. What I liked about that is, at least the way I'm reading it, is that a lot of problems and issues can be avoided when DERs and management are aligned with each other, when they're educated but also supported, not just from sort of a you got hired, this is your job, good luck, we'll be back if you have a major catastrophe and we have to reprimand you or something like that. I mean, I see this that is a very critical statement right there. But I like the fact, Greg, that it's shaped by experiences that you've actually had, which are reflected in the book.
So that, again, it comes from let me go back to this one. So I had a DER who, wanted to make some alterations to, some documents. And, I advised against it. It didn't happen, and that's more in the chapter of Mirror, Mirror. And I asked later on, like, what made you actually want to go down that road? And one of the things that came up was I had just got into this role and I wanted to show leadership that I knew what I was doing. And know what I'm doing in our world means minimal violations, minimal, little to no write-ups. And the fear that a lot of these DERs have in having violations, kind of sways their thought process when trying to navigate through this program. And I think if the managers and the leadership and the executives really understood the program, then they can and work together with the DER, it will help minimize that fear that I'm going to lose my job or that I'm going to get fired because I have this violation. So that shaped more of the direction of the book, is like, how can I now express this concern to the industry so that they can really understand that, these DERs really have a lot on their plate, but they don't have the outlet with their leadership. And not saying everybody, because there's some who do have a relationship where they can go and shut the door with their leader and, sit down with them and just be able to express it. Like a smaller mom and pop, operation, will more likely the DER can go in there with the owner and have a conversation with them about the program.
Yeah.
The bigger the program gets, the further they get disconnected from leadership, and therefore they don't have that availability to go in and just talk to the CEO or go talk to the president or even skip level management, to be able to talk. So the fear of failing this program causes a lot of anxiety, and I wanted to kind of dig into that. So that kind of shaped the direction of it.
And I haven't read chapter 18, Mirror, Mirror, yet, but I turned to it just now, and I want to just read for the audience the introductory statement at the beginning. Integrity is rarely tested when everything is going right. I think that's so true, right? I think when everything's going right, yeah. But The real test begins. I love the way you worded this. The real test begins the moment fear starts negotiating with what you know is right. And so by that, are you talking about in the moment, in the heat of the moment, when something's really gone wrong and suddenly, your integrity is put to the test?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's where, the mirror piece comes in, where you now have to look at yourself and go, I know I shouldn't, but if I don't, the outcome is going to be this, this, this. So the fear outweighs, the right way.
Yeah.
You know?
So the book is Trust But Verify. It's got a really cool cover on there. How can people find the book if they're interested in purchasing it?
Well, there's two ways. You can go to Amazon and you can order it on Amazon, and it'll be, you'll get either Kindle hardback or paperback, and it'll just be standard. But if you order directly through me, you'll get the same price from Amazon, and you can email me, at federaldrugtesting@gmail.com, or you can, if you're on my LinkedIn, you can DM me. But from me, you'll get the same price. But however, if you want it, I'll autograph it. You get the bookmark and you get a mouse pad. But the hardback, if you order the hardback through me, you actually get the dust jacket that comes with it. You won't get that on Amazon. You'll just get, the book.
So at your office, you have a stack of them there, and if an order comes in, out it goes with some of the goodies.
Yeah,
I love it. That's a great idea.
Yeah, so I had to order the dust jacket separately because Amazon don't do dust jackets.
Okay. Well, we're going to let all of our people know, at Current Consulting Group, we maintain a very up-to-date list of about 6,600 professionals in the drug testing industry. We're going to let them know about this book. Anything else you'd want to say in closing, Greg?
Other than thanks for having me on, I really do hope that, people really take the time out to read it. It's not a book that you read through like a novel. I think that you should just take the book by chapter and, kind of read it along that line. And if you are a manager and you have, people under you in management, I think that you should get a copy for each one of them, and you guys pick a chapter and talk about it and discuss it. Or like I said, some DERs have gotten it and gave it to their executives, and they put the bookmark in the chapter where they want them to start, at reading. And I guess one of the questions I want to answer, Bill, you didn't ask, but I do want to mention it, is that people will ask me, like, what is my favorite chapter out of the whole book? I think they're all important. And I do have a couple that are, very, near to me, and that's probably Tears Are Real. And I want to say that the last chapter of it, if it may not be the last chapter, but close to it, as to why you still do it. Why do you still do this job after all of this that you've read? Why do you still do it? And I think that those two will probably be my favorite chapters, because those are more more direct. And
those are chapters 24 and 34. Tears Are Real is 24, and Why We Still Do It 34. That's great, Greg. Thank you. I also, let's just do another episode of Currently Speaking, because I think we could go another half hour on chapter 37, marijuana legalization and versus federal reality. I haven't read that chapter yet. I'm going to read that one.
Read it? I thought that would have been the first one that you read.
Yeah. I won't mention it here during the podcast, but I've had a day when it comes to the whole marijuana issue, starting with the Wall Street Journal wanting to ask me a bunch of questions about rescheduling, and then that just started there. So,
yeah, I just went more human side of it. I didn't go DC with it,
But I'd like to dive into that whole issue with you. Also, let's do another episode on the FAA foreign repair station issue. That's a big one.
Yeah, I'll be heading out to Dublin, Dublin, Ireland for the IFDAC conference and speaking out there on it. And I think I'm going to go a different angle with it that hasn't been done yet, with this speaking from the angle of the airlines and the actual repair stations. Like how are they looking at this? Because everybody's concerned with the policy side of it, but what does the repair station, side of it, and the airlines, how are their, what are their concerns? How are they viewing it? Everything is policy and rulings right now, but what are the actual airlines' concerns? Because they're the ones, regardless if the repair station get their act together or not, is up to the airlines on whether they want to hire them as a customer. So it still is a great piece to, this whole, ruling.
Well, and the audience probably knows this already, but Greg literally works with many of the biggest name brands in the aviation industry. I won't go through your client list, but that reminds me, Greg, there is a paragraph that I marked on page 8, which is what this book is not. I thought that was an interesting way to start. This book is not, and then a whole litany of things, right? But I like this paragraph. This book is not meant to scare. Fear is one of the least effective ways to encourage compliance, and this industry already has enough fear. I think that goes to the FAA foreign repair station issue and the marijuana issue and a whole bunch of things. I thought you just hit the nail right on the head there.
I actually forgot about that page, and glad you brought it up, because I wanted to, because of my past and my previous employment and whatever. I didn't want people to jump in and think that I'm about to dump on the FAA or I'm about to dump on, stuff. And I thought that was a unique thing to add to the book,
Yeah. Yeah. You also say the goal here is awareness, not worry.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to put it. Thank you, Greg, for making the time to do this. We'll schedule another podcast episode. We'll talk about the FAA foreign repair station issue. We'll do that one separately, and then maybe do a separate one on the whole marijuana rescheduling, legalization, et cetera, because I know you've got a lot to say there as well.
Yeah, it's growing.
Yeah. Anyways, but thank you again. Greg Henderson, Federal Drug Testing Services. I had a friend whose father was the dentist to the stars in Hollywood. And Greg is like the dentist to the stars in the aviation industry. He's the man who can fix the pain. So
I'm working on it.
Yeah. But thank you again, Greg. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Currently Speaking. Again, if you're interested in past episodes, go to currentconsultinggroup.com. You'll find an archive of past episodes of the podcast, of our webinars, our blog posts, etc. And if there's something that you'd like us to talk about, let us know. We would love to consider your recommendation. And then just also in closing, Trust But Verify by Greg Henderson. I highly recommend it. You can get it through Amazon, or you can reach out to Greg directly, and it comes with a whole bunch of different goodies. Thank you again for joining us, Greg. Thank you for being part of the podcast today.
Appreciate you guys.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.